Welcome to the PI Podcast. I'm your host, Matt, and with me is political scholar, meme lord, and part time guardian of the underworld, Borj.
Part-time. Part-time lang. Di pa ba ako napopromote?
Oh, right.
PI nyo, PI nating lahat. Borj here at your service.
hmm And speaking of which, how are you doing today, Borj, since the last episode? Anything new with you?
Since the last episode, well, I am now teaching. I'm back to teaching, and online classes
Mhm.
are weird. Online classes
How
are very
weird.
weird. I mean,
Well,
very weird.
mm,
It can easily slip into a very weird and fucked up episode of Dora the Explorer. So yes, that's how weird it is. So we'll see what
Dora the
happens.
Explorer. Hello, class. What do you think? I think so too. That's your online class. Well, you get used to it. But congratulations on finally being employed.
Borja,
Yeah,
no
most
asking. Borja,
Bora, no
no
asking.
asking.
Oh
So
my
how,
gosh.
how
Well,
have you
good.
been handling
Hmm.
on online classes? Any tips?
Any tips on online? Well, don't scare them too much. So turn off your camera. No, I'm joking. But that's seriously, there are right now online classes is a very stressful time for students. It's a new thing for them and for us. The difference between us adults is we have our own coping mechanisms. Students have yet to discover their own in this. So just I'd say take it easier on them because I've been told that I use the my usual workload and
You
they are
scary.
totally stressed out. I'm scary apparently. I'm like, ugh. So yeah, just I'd say take it easy on them, and that's also a reminder for myself. Oh, and yeah, be careful with like asking too deep questions. So sometimes questions stress them out. So yeah, they're young
No.
minds. Don't break them. Well,
No.
anyway.
Okay.
Well, they'll let you know if it's too much for them. But I think, speaking of questions,
Mm.
we have some questions of our own because we gathered questions from our email, our Ask FM, and some viewers, actually, our listeners, uh, for this session. So today is our first Q&A session from the PI
Wee.
community. Salamat mga PI sa mga tanong ninyo. And so we're going to take them on today. Is that all right? So
Great.
yeah, very interesting stuff. First off is it's more than one. It's like a couple of questions from a listener and a friend of mine from Ateneo, Bugs Estepona. Hi, Bugs. Thanks for the questions. And we decided to start with his questions, because I think these are great introductory questions to get to know us better. And he's curious,
Mm.
first of all, with our positions in the political spectrum. Like, what are
Mm.
Matt and Borges' positions in the political spectrum? Are we conservative? Are we progressive? Marxist? Uh, Fascist? You know,
Am I fascist?
SJWs? I don't. Well, what do you want to try to answer that first, Borge? What
You,
is
you, you go
your
first. You go first.
orientation?
What is Matt's
Mm,
orientation?
oh, that's a very personal question. Next question, please. No, person.
Political orientation.
Uh, Political orientation. Well, when they say the political spectrum, it used to be quadrants or positions in, say, the political compass,
Yeah.
wherein normally in the right side you have conservatives, people who want to maintain the status quo, and you have the progressive who want to change and reform. And then on the upper quadrant, you have more authoritative, which means more
Hmm.
government authority, and you have the lower quadrant, which is
Libertarian.
more libertarian. So that imagine a Cartesian plane, the x and y axis. And right now, that has actually been a it's flawed, deeply flawed way to measure someone's orientation. But just for the sake of simplicity, we're going to use that, at least from left or right
Hmm.
part. Are are we conservative or are we progressive? And for me, I think you and I both have changed our positions throughout
Hmm.
the years.
Hmm.
And honestly, I'm not totally convinced of my own positions. When I take tests, when I was much younger, I used to get left left of center because of being like a young
Hmm.
person reading Marx, and I was enamored with Marx. Um, Marx, who else? And Zizek, David Harvey.
Mm.
Those are my gateway philosophers. And then all of a sudden, I became disillusioned a bit for one thing because I was purged from my SOCDEM party, Social Democratic Party, the leftist student party back in Ateneo, for having well, I can't get over my Christian views. I've doubted them,
Mm.
but they're still a part of me. And I think to this day, I'm a bit more enamored, and fascinated by theology. So in a way, it defined my politics. I tried to be secular about it, tried to balance it, but it's still like my idea of a human person. It's like we're all children of God. They deserve human dignity, and
Mm.
at the same time, social values. But it's also related to like my reaction to political phenomenon. So it's like right of center.
Mm.
Normally, when you're left of center, when you see that there's something wrong, or when the media says, "Oh, we need more reform. The system is corrupt. We need change." Most progressives would automatically identify with that, say yes,
Mm.
out of empathy.
Mm.
Because people are suffering. For the right, their instinct and my instinct is like, really? Like, in what way? In what sense does need this change? Do we need to change this much or that much? So that's the instinct. Yes, okay, prove it, and which part. So
Mm.
in a way, that's also matched with a political philosophical profile. So
Mm.
and I think it's a product of, number one, getting older, but number two, my disposition as a scholar. I say, okay, prove it. Okay, what is your indicators? What are
Mm.
I look for quantitative proofs of, like, when people ask for change. Okay, in what sense? It's
Mm.
like that. Like, I take after G.K. Chesterton when he says, like, before we take an offense, see what it's for.
Mm.
So that's my general thing. I'm right of center.
Mm.
So what about you? That's a long
Bas- so,
explanation, but how
no, so
about you?
basically a tendency to qualify change, which is valid to an extent. All programs of change should be qualified based on reality. So basically, you're that voice of
Mm-hmm.
qualification, measurement, and make it more realistic. Am I right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Enough about me. What about you?
Where the hell am I in the political compass? Dude, I am also enamored with Marx, but why am I in the upper left? I was right smack with Stalin way back in undergrad. I was on
Ooh,
top of Stalin.
Stalin.
Mm.
Mm.
But yeah,
It's that mustache, probably.
no, that was in undergrad. So yeah, the thing
Oh,
is,
okay.
whenever we discuss political orientation, one thing that we must take into account would be the capacity of a person to move from one part to another, and to an extent, level of consistency. But I do have very little respect for anyone who is right smack in the center, because I do know people who are
Mm.
right smack in the center. But yeah,
Wow.
to each his own. But I was never close to the center. I
Mm-hmm.
was never close to the center. So that's one thing that, regarding my political orientation in general. For now,
Mm-hmm.
I actually took the test earlier just to check,
Mm-hmm.
double check where on God's name am I located, and I am currently lower left. So I'm libertarian
So
and
you became less authoritarian.
yeah, less
You mellowed
authoritarian.
out, became more chill.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so. I think so. So politically, I'm more libertarian, and economically, I'm way in the left. I'm way on the left.
What
So
happened there? Like, what caused that change?
uh, what caused that change? The thing is, okay, we go back to what you said earlier. The political compass right now is relatively inaccurate. So I think the movement from upper left to lower left would be my appreciation of what liberty is. However, I think it fails to capture, the compass fails to capture my attachment with the free market to an extent. So they still put me right
Mm-hmm.
smack in the left.
Mm-hmm.
And due to my association with you, I have been more closer to more conservative thinkers, which I find reason in them. And as you would always say, I'm a stone throws away from being a Christian, but I'm not. So yeah,
Oh yeah, because before, when I met Borj, he was like a hard Marxist atheist, and then
yeah.
as we continued to converse, he became closer to Christianity. Not quite returning to the Catholic fold where he was born and raised, but almost. And at least he's using it through a process of thinking rather than saying, "Oh, okay."
Yeah,
Like, it's
yeah.
not. It hasn't been easy, but it's an appreciated conversation. It's just ongoing. Question is, so I think in a sense, you're still left and not
Yeah,
quite right.
let's just say that my notion of change, I know some, I do pin my hopes on certain programs of change. I do believe that some change should be rapid and drastic. I still believe in such economic change should be drastic as well as political change. But I am also capable of, as you yourself would practice, qualifying calls for change. So there's also a mixture. I do believe that
Mm-hmm.
conservatism have, or tradition, even the notion of tradition is unavoidable. It's better handled rather than totally rejected.
Right.
So
But speaking of which, I think the biggest indicator of you being left is you being unable to, how to say, respect elites as your equals, and that's what you ended
yeah,
with, I think, in our last episode. So can you explain more about that? That was interesting. Like, why do you refuse to respect elites as your equals, or as an equal human being?
because they're not. They're not. They're elites. First and
Ooh.
foremost, they have created that position and they want to maintain it at the expense of everyone else. That's basically the notion of an elite. There's no such thing as an elite that was not paid for by everyone else. But then again,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, people would say that elites are unavoidable. Okay, let's take it that elites are unavoidable. So we've shifted the question to how much cost should an elite or should the rest pay for a certain elite? What kind of elite should stay, and how often can they revolve or circulate? That's one thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm. So, but despite their position as an elite, they're creating a structure wherein they're on top.
Hmm.
What we're actually trying to go for is, even behind that is still a human being who can be forgiven or change, or with the soul or whatever. Don't you believe that even as a person, with all that social facade and structure, they're still just like us? Or are they beyond being forgiven as an elite?
To an extent, I will not generalize, but as far as my target elites are concerned, oligarchs, to be more specific, those who hold on to power at the expense of everyone else, those who hold on to wealth at the expense of everyone else's poverty, will you call them human? It is their tendency. Okay, let me say, do they deserve the same dignity that should be given to everyone else? No,
Ooh.
no, no, because
Oh my. Hot take.
their tendencies are to an extent antisocial, especially when taken to an
Oh,
extreme. Especially
okay.
when taken to an extreme.
Hmm. See, here's the clash. We may be
Mm,
both scholars with we're somewhat like-minded,
mm,
but we still have clear differences. It's like you're on the
mm,
left, you can't forgive elites,
mm,
and you're still aligned with Marx. So maybe
mm.
before we move on, let's talk a little about that. Or how aligned with you with Marx and the rest of the Marxist left,
Oh yeah.
which is fascinating. But in a way, I'm still on the right, which is very much opposed to Marx, but still appreciates somewhat of his theory. So,
Mm,
but for you, what is your relationship with Marx
mm.
right now?
Marx, I get my method from Marx. I am not a Marxist like Marx. That's one thing
Mhm.
that's for sure. The thing is, it's more of
What's his method?
dialectics, of course, materialistic dialectics, scientific dialectics. So that's one thing I got from him, and I would keep that one. So I am not a Marxist like him. I think something that we share would be this tendency to criticize everything we can lay our hands on.
Mm,
So that's one thing. That's my attachment to Marx. It's more of the
right.
analytical intensity that I want to
Hmm.
emulate. Hmm. You know that regarding elites,
So it wasn't.
the paradox is I am conscious that to an extent I am an elite.
Oh,
That's a great
in what
paradox.
sense, Mister Borj?
Well, I am an
How are you
academic
an
elite.
elite?
I'm an academic elite.
Ooh,
So
okay.
that's one thing. So there's a challenge. So again, I cannot generalize overall elite. So let me qualify my previous statements. I'm just targeting oligarchs, really. Just targeting
Okay.
oligarchs.
So oligarchs listening now, watch out when he grabs power. Borj is coming for you.
Grab them by the
Anyway,
power.
oh my god. Oh my god. Okay. That's interesting. Well, I think we continue that part of the conversation, but we're sticking here just so you get to know where we stand better. All right. So he's more of the left of center. I'm more of the right of center. But I
Mm,
think it's also impossible for scholars to be, have extreme views,
mm,
with some exceptions, because in a way, scholars, and we can continue this conversation another time,
mm,
are, to borrow Glenn Gould's words, are have the role of both a museum curator, which studies the past with theories that have gone by, and also an innovator, to
mm,
discover new knowledge. So in a way, we hold both of those roles, so we can never
mm,
take one or the other. So it's impossible for us to be too extreme. But
mm,
we're different enough to provide a balanced view on things.
mm.
So if you're into that, great. So yeah, a
But but
conservative versus a
but
progressive
but let me ask
here
you.
in the PI podcast. Yeah.
Let me ask you: Is that can we consider that as a political position in itself?
Hmm. I don't know. What do you think? I think you think so. Uh,
Mm,
well, for me, if I take it back, the fact that the role of a scholar, kind traditionally, has
mm,
been out of the fray,
mm,
so they can't somewhat afford for their sake of their objectivity, they can't take a sharp stance on these things, like a clear Republican or a clear Democratic or a clear
mm,
progressive or clear conservative stance.
mm,
So in a way, that's what our occupation does to us. It can't, because we're so objective, we have to somewhat can't have hard positions. But at
mm,
the same time, it is, you're right, a position in itself. It's just not as stable. At least I presume, as scholars, we look for data,
mm,
or even with theories which evolve depending on studies and
mm,
debates and discussions. Which, come to think of it, if now that I think about it, it can be a more intellectually mature attitude to phenomena for the regular person.
mm.
In a way, almost all, like, the process of a flexible mind is able to have its own fundamentals, but also incorporate new knowledge.
Mm.
So I think you're onto something there. Is that have you do I
Yeah,
get
to an
that
extent.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's more of a third leg on a stool.
Hmm. Oh my, a third leg.
On a
Wow.
stool. I said on a stool.
Okay. All right. Anyway, so that's question number one.
Yeah.
But anyway, question. Let's move on to the next question.
Mm,
Uh, Bugs wants to know, what are great practices for breaking up toxic groupthink without being confrontational or agitating. And this is
mm.
related to our like last previous episode when we
Yeah,
talk
yeah,
about
yeah.
why can't we be friends, or
Yep.
how do we deal with disagreement. And
Mm,
he wants to know, how do we break up toxic groupthink,
mm,
which I think he's talking about. Oh, we're like, you're in a family. Your family is DDS, and then
mm,
you are the lone progressive, or like you're the lone opponent, or
mm,
vice versa.
mm.
So how do you break toxic groupthink?
Ooh,
You want
that
to start?
is that is very tricky.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think two things popped into my head. Two things for now. First would be understand, have a clear understanding of the nature of that group thing to begin with, because you cannot
Mm-hmm.
engage anyone without having a clear understanding of where they actually stand.
Mm.
So
Right.
you must be knowledgeable with their own arguments.
Mm.
Second, you must also be knowledgeable that you are also a member of a certain group think. That's a great
Oh.
paradox. Group thinking is
Mm.
not avoidable. That's one thing that we must recognize. I think that's my first answer to that one. Group thinking is not avoidable, but toxicity is. Toxicity is. So how do
Oh.
you avoid toxicity? Uh, it's not about not being confrontational. It's more of not being agitating. But confrontation should
Mm-hmm.
take a. It also depends on how you convey your ideas. Really, you
Mm-hmm.
convey. Again, we came from China. We were taught Confucian values, and one part would be, even if yeah, if your father, for the sake of filial piety, if your father commits commit something wrong, then you must reprimand with all due respect. So it's also a
Mm-hmm.
matter of speaking, really.
Mm.
Should have read.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because it's funny, like when you identify something as toxic and bring it up with them,
Hmm.
like, hey, that's toxic. Maybe they can call you toxic,
Yeah.
like what right do you have?
Hmm.
And it's actually he has this other question. It's kind of related.
Hmm.
What is the best way to persuade or at least work with someone who is radically on the other side of the political fence as you? And I think I can answer. My answer
Yeah. Yeah.
is combined. I think you cannot go in.
Hmm.
I think you're correct in saying and you can't break toxic groupthink. You have to understand them, and that's very important.
Hmm.
But what I have to say is, I mean, even though you find their views so like inconceivable, so unbearable, hindi mo na kaya, nakaka-PI na. I
Hmm.
think you cannot go in with the intention of convincing them. Like for
Hmm.
instance, it's like that Mormons or missionaries who knock on your door. It's like, hello, I
Hmm.
want you to, and they're like trying to, of course they're nice, but they're trying to
Hmm.
shove their religion down your throats, even
Yeah.
though presumably you have your own religion that's different.
Hmm.
And they'd see you as a threat. It's like that your agenda is like trying to change their mind.
Hmm.
Whereas if you just try to understand and get their point of view,
Hmm.
maybe you can adjust your own. Maybe you can find out
Yep.
ways in which you're wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, even say for instance, DDS,
Yeah.
there might be something correct with their worldview, even though it's
Hmm.
sometimes murky or emotional, irrational.
Hmm.
There must be a part of the truth in there for you. So, my point of view is try to question your own identification of them as being toxic. Maybe it's coming from a real place of
Hmm.
pain and it's being relieved by, whatever view they're holding right now. And
Yeah.
their views are to them personal. So if you come in saying that they're wrong, no. So in order for you to persuade them, try to make sure to make them feel that you listen to them and
Hmm.
that you find their views valid. And then maybe present some maybe counterfacts or maybe like
Hmm.
just say, ask them questions. Most people say, hindi totoo yan kasi
Hmm.
eto, ganyan,
Hmm.
counterfacts. One
Hmm.
say, be Socratic. Like, what have you considered this? And they
Yeah.
can ask you questions. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's more of trying to make them recognize certain things that they have missed,
Hmm.
and in turn, you can also recognize things that you have missed. Because the human thought is limited. That's one thing that we must take into account. Human thought is limited. Even the smartest one cannot comprehend everything else. You would always miss something else. I
Hmm.
think that's the first step towards learning and trying to work with
Hmm.
people from the other side of the fence. You try to
Hmm.
find you yourself, along with the one you're conversing with. Try to find things that you have missed, because that's the tactic that I usually use whenever I talk with Marcos apologists. I ask them, as you have said, ask them questions. For me, I would target it, ask them questions that would let them recognize that they have missed something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, but so, well, that's way of engagement. But come to think of it, do you think that the need to persuade, like, is quite valid? Because for me, not as a regular person, you don't have to persuade people all the time. But
Mm,
persuading is for people with jobs like marketers. You have to do
mm.
this, or political parties. But as a regular person, do you have to persuade people? Is-
Uh,
if,
do you?
mhm,
I think that's something that we
yeah,
got from Christianity, the apostolic
missionary,
missionary
the
tendency
missionary.
tendency
Uh-huh.
to convince everyone
Yeah.
else. Should we? Should we?
Hmm.
I'm split with that one. Part of me would say, part of me was still attached with the political left would say, yeah, we need to convince other people. Another part
Hmm.
of me would say, if reality cannot convince them, they're beyond redemption.
Right. And it's funny. It's even close to my personal philosophy of the education,
Hmm.
and because well, teaching grade school and high school, you have to teach them facts. You need to teach them in a way, what to believe. But
Hmm.
with educating adults like you and I in
Hmm.
university and college, um, they have their own beliefs. the thing, and you cannot change them in a matter of a term or a semester.
Yep.
So instead, you just simply make them curious, make them think, like perhaps, like that slight inch of like them thinking, and they can their own views can be reinforced, and that's
Mm.
a product of good education. Or they can change their mind, which is also a product of good education, as long as they go through the process of thinking. You
Systematic
know?
thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, yeah.
Okay. Hmm.
Did we actually answer
Okay.
those questions?
Yeah.
At one extent.
And okay, so those are Bugs' questions. So thank you for those. I hope we answered them. If you have further comments, feel free to contact us again. And I think we have a few
Yeah,
questions
yeah,
from
yeah.
Ask FM,
Yeah, we do
and
have
you
some
have some.
questions. Yeah, 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 I do. First one would be in Taglish. So, ano po
Mhm.
ang nature ng slavery? And bakit po hanggang ngayon nag-exist pa rin po ang slavery? It's relatively packed. The other question would be, ano-ano po ang mga factors or puwersa na siyang dahilan ng pagkakaroon ng slavery sa isang lipunan? Okay.
Oof, Taglish.
Okay, okay,
That's
okay.
rough.
Okay, so slavery,
Hmm.
slavery, slavery.
You want to start, or should I?
Yeah, I think you should. You should.
Well, it's funny. I was just reviewing Aristotle's The Politics, um, in preparation for my classes, and he has a chapter on slavery. And the impression I get, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because you've been reading Aristotle longer. Um, it's slavery. Some people are born slaves
Mm,
and therefore deserve to be, because there are people who use reason, with the right body and the right mind for to be free, and apparently according to him there are people who are not, and that is the truth. Not everyone is born with the same level of intelligence, the
mm,
same way that not everyone has the same physicality, the same
mm.
kind of body. So there are some people born to lead, and there are other people
Be
born to
slaves.
serve.
Yeah.
Which, and the thing is, it's hard to swallow, but at the same time, he also says that there are people somewhat born without reason. But in a way, today our assumption is everyone is deserving of dignity, even if their mental and physical abilities are different. But in today's day and age, what brings them into slavery is perhaps conditions to dependency on a more powerful person, say an employer, say a
Mm,
landlord, or even a warlord. And in fact, slavery exists today. Well, number one, the prison system in America,
mm,
wherein prisoners are victims of a system, but that's kind of another story. It's a systemic form of slavery. And then there are still sexual forms of slavery that sometimes people are abducted for that slavery,
mm,
which has been for going on for thousands of years. But
mm,
other people go into that, are recruited precisely because they have nowhere else to go.
mm,
At least when they are in service of people, like of you know their masters, quote unquote.
mm,
At least they have food, because it is within the master's interest to feed the slaves and protect them in their household. And this is
mm.
true. This has been true for thousands of years. So perhaps you can say that social conditions have
Yeah.
made people dependent on slavery. Maybe
Mm,
it's sheer violence. There are people evil enough to kidnap
mm,
prisoners of war, even, or
mm,
uh, individuals. Or uh, yeah, some people don't have the strength to fight for their own freedom, and they prefer to
mm,
follow rules and serve.
mm.
So sometimes there's this idea that slavery is a choice. That's like Kanye West. And okay, with regards to African American slavery in America, that's a debate. But in some cases, and this is kind of a
Mm,
maybe learned helplessness is a part that might be a choice for some people. It's better for them to be followed and to serve rather than to which is why a lot of people try to appeal to their desire for freedom. Like, don't you want to be free and to have your own dignity? And some people
mm.
say no, and that's sad. But sometimes there's nothing we can do. Your turn.
Slavery, slavery is a okay. Regarding that one, okay, I think you touched on certain things that I would like to elaborate. Is slavery a
Mm.
choice? No, it is not a choice. It is the absence of choice. What's far
Mm.
worse is that slavery refers to a condition wherein a person sees nothing more than that condition.
Mm.
So it's not only the absence of choice, the notion of choice itself is impossible for a slave. And a slave ceases to
Mm.
be a slave when he or she gains or starts to cease as a slave when he or she gains this consciousness of freedom. That is from a Hegelian perspective. But again, slavery should be defined from various perspectives. Even if you think that you are not a slave, if social conditions or actual coercion would be there to enslave you, then
Mhm.
you are a slave. So, regarding the first
Mm.
question on the nature of slavery, we must define slavery from in relation to other factors. So you already mentioned social conditions. You also mentioned coercion. You may be coerced to surrender your freedom. Absolutely. You may be subjected to arbitrary power. So that's another thing. Slavery can be a condition wherein you are subject absolutely to arbitrary power. Anyone can do anything to you. But
Mm.
regarding one point that I would like to make, one crucial point is that the issue of slavery itself exposes how morality is historical. Slavery was good.
Mm.
Before it was good until the 19th century. It was, at least for the American South, it was good. It was deemed as good.
Mhm.
They defended slavery during the American Civil War in ancient Athens. This is something that Rousseau mentioned and eventually was analyzed by historians. Athenian democracy was founded on slaves.
Mhm.
It was basically slavery that sustained Athens as an economy that allowed its men to be politically active because they have slaves. That's one thing. So basically, that's the
Mm.
schema for ancient Athens. So if slavery was good, but now it is bad, the same logic applies to all our moral assumptions. They are not permanent. And we go
Mhm.
to the notion of human rights, as you have been mentioning for the past few minutes, human dignity, that everyone should have human dignity. Yes, that's an assumption that may be considered as good for now, doesn't mean that it would be good for the next century.
Mm.
And it's not,
Things. Mm.
yeah, human dignity was also not a good or a value before. It's limited. So,
Mm.
yeah,
Whew.
morals are historical. So regarding that question on slavery, yes.
Who asked this question? Parang ang
I don't know.
hirap
It's
naman,
probably
nag-nosebleed
your
na ako
student.
eh.
Probably your student.
Why is it my student? Baka sa'yo yun eh. Sabi mo
No, no.
konyo eh. Di ba?
Oh, dang it.
Ah,
Okay,
Oo.
okay. Okay, let's move on
Ay,
to. Do
nako. But
you have any other points
well,
on slavery?
just to end, I mean, okay, I think with the it is a complex concept. The simplest way to define it, I think, slavery as we know it was really in ancient times where
Hmm.
people subjected them to labor without fair wages. There's also it occurs in colonial times where
Hmm.
en masse the colonial subjects were forced to into labor,
Hmm.
without wages, also without fair treatment. And that has ended, but certain forms of slavery
Hmm.
still exist:
Yeah.
slave trade, human trafficking, uh, and prisoners of war sometimes, even though
Hmm.
there are rules against that. And it still exists, yeah, precisely because the systems that guarantee freedom are flawed. So that's the simplest answer,
Yeah.
and sometimes it is a metaphor. Sometimes there's a slave mentality, like people right now, even though we're in a free country,
Sleeps.
in some ways they enslave themselves, to certain conditions or certain
Hmm.
things. So sometimes it's metaphorical, sometimes it's literal. So
Hmm.
your question didn't specify that, so it can go on for like a whole different episode. So it's
Yeah.
interesting. Thank you for the question, whoever you are, from Ask FM. That's very a lot to think about.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
You
Yep.
have another you have
Yeah.
another question?
Yeah. We can even try to tackle slavery eventually when we discuss freedom. But moving on. Moving on. We also have another question. Where is the soul located in man? Easy answers on the foot.
Sa paa. Next question. Sa paa lang.
Sa palag yan. Ano
Mm,
ba? Nasa puwet.
oo.
Okay, okay, okay. Just, do you want to
Mm.
take this one or should I go first?
Well, I started a while ago,
Okay,
so
okay, okay. Okay.
the soul.
The
What
soul.
is the soul?
Where is the soul? Sa paa.
Yeah. Sa paa. Oh. Tapos. Anyway. Mm.
So, Where's the soul?
Yes. You want?
Okay, fine, fine. I'll start. I'll start regarding where's
Do
the
you
soul.
know?
The thing
Okay.
is, okay, regarding where the soul is located, for the longest time, I've never believed in its existence. Again, I was for the longest time an
Mm,
atheist, so that's one thing. Now, where's the soul located? Now, I think reading Henri Bergson's work on human existence, creative evolution, the notion of life itself. One thing, I think the soul can be located in our memories. If we have
memories.
memories is basically the human memory. A soul that is cohesive can be measured by a series or a set of memories that are coherent. The more you repress, the more illogical or the more damaged your memories are. That's also an indicator that your soul is damaged or besmirched. That's why you confess in
Mm,
religion, so you can relieve your
mm-hmm,
memory of such burdens, hence, quote unquote,
mm-hmm,
cleansing your soul. But yeah,
mm-hmm,
so if you want to keep your soul pure, make sure that whatever you do would fit in your chain of memories so that your past
mm,
is perfectly or at least cohesively linked with your present and eventually your
mm-hmm.
future. So yeah, that's the soul
Mm,
really. What about you?
uh,
Since you have a Christian perspective.
well, okay. Let me just, if I can question that a bit.
Hmm.
You're limiting. Well, not well. It's a bit limited for me, but you are defining the soul as a condition from your memories, how you remember, how you perceive your life, and there are ways in which sometimes memories can be taken away, say by a an accident or maybe hypnosis or like a physical injury. So are you saying that the soul is somewhat can be taken away same way the memories can be taken away?
The thing
Is
is,
that how you lose a soul
you
by
can
forgetting?
damage memory, but you really cannot take it away unless you lop off a
Mm-hmm.
part of your brain, which would
Mm-hmm.
probably lead to death. But memories, I think, as far as neurology is concerned, can be
Mm.
damaged, but not necessarily permanently removed. So yes, the soul can
Right.
be damaged if that is a possibility. But then again,
Mm-hmm.
we are set in time. If a person
Mm-hmm.
loses a large chunk of his or her memory, then
Mm-hmm.
that person still has the rest of his life to more or less buttress his or her soul or his memory
Yeah.
based on what remains. I don't know, just my take on it.
Uh-huh.
Is the memory
Well,
immortal? I don't know. I'm just
clearly not because
yeah.
as you age, that's one other factor. As you age, you lose your memory. Do people lose like do old people lose their souls as they lose their memory as they have Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, whatever?
Yeah, that's one thing. That's one thing. That's the limit of my analysis. Really, I'm more concerned about the soul and how to measure it and how to make it a part of practice.
Teka lang, baka nano-nosebleed na yung mga tao sa sa topic na to. I
Eh
mean,
kasi nung
believe it
puti.
or not, oo
So,
nga eh. May nagtanong. Here's the thing. When you, if you're from, if you're familiar with Ask FM, normally there'd be questions like, what's your favorite color? Like, what would you do if you have a crush on someone? Or what's your favorite getaway? But then that stuck out for us, saying, where is the soul located? Like, huh? And I think for you, it's memories, and implicitly, it's the brain. Fair enough. It's an answer. I don't totally agree with it, but I think it's important in
mm,
perceiving and feeling the the soul, whatever it is.
I think yeah. What about you?
Yeah.
That's the best that my reason
Mm.
can do. What about you?
Well, definitely we need memories to perceive our soul and to make
Yeah.
sense of our soul.
Mm.
Again, and my main source for this is Bishop Barron, and I can post a link to the main source of my argument. But uh, uh, I remember the soul, according to him, is not like an item among many. It's like an or an organ among many.
Mm.
But according to Bishop Barron and the rest of the Catholic Church, presumably, the soul is like the totality of an individual's existence. In other
Mm.
words, even if the body were to die, the soul would live on. That's the why I mentioned that. Like so, if even if your body dies, that means the soul would be eradicated. So I'm
Mm.
assuming you're arguing with the materialist presumptions. That's why
To
you
an
focus
ex,
it on
yeah,
memory.
yeah.
Mm, yeah, but like with the Catholic tradition, it's something beyond. And I think it brings you back to discourses on the soul, particularly like, for instance, what does it mean when you sell your soul? Uh, when you sell it to Mephistopheles, does he get an item? Say, for your case, it's the brain, so he gets the brain of Faustus, or does he get like this? It's usually represented as an orb or a flame, or like a light bulb, or like a tiny human person,
Mm.
like with a glow of light. But really, it's not. It's a metaphor. But for what I think is, and I think this is what how Bishop Barron discusses it. You lose your soul when you no longer yearn for transcendence or God. In this case, God, because normally when someone say you sold your soul, it means usually you are fixated with something material. Like you sell
Mm.
your soul for like a donut for Homer Simpson, sell your soul all the riches in the world or like that. That means you are satiated by the things that are material. The soul is something. It's perhaps this metaphorical language is that thing that hungers for something that is beyond.
Mm.
Now, it's not merely a hunger, but we only perceive and we are made aware of that soul when we hunger for something. For the religious, it's God,
Mm.
or for others, it's some form of transcendence. So I think that's at least even my multi-religious
Mm.
in ecumenical definition of the soul. It's that part of the human being which humbles that. And of course we sense it with our body, but it's not one part of our body.
Mm.
It's something else that's
Yeah,
located within us.
yeah, yeah. That's basically. I think
Hmm.
my argument is subsumed under yours, since you said that, well, as far as Bishop Barron is concerned, the soul is the totality of human existence or
Hmm.
human being, and the material, our bodies, our memories, is part of that totality.
Hmm.
So you really
Yeah.
didn't negate mine. I'm not trying to reduce the soul to the human brain. I'm just trying to
Right.
define the soul in relation to practice, and that is the closest thing that I can
Right.
say.
Hmm.
Uh,
So it's
yeah, that's where that's
yeah.
where the soul is located.
So it's funny. Like for instance, if you look at Mephistopheles, when Faustus trades his soul, Mephistopheles does not get an item, despite it being represented that way. But Faustus simply lost a capacity to see beyond Earth or beyond the material
Mm,
realm. So he loses that orientation. And
mm.
I think that's all we can observe. It's an orientation looking beyond
Yeah,
that hunger for God. You know.
yeah.
Woo!
Hunger for the divine, hunger for the divine, hunger
Mhm.
for beyond humanity. To an extent, is hunger for immortality would also be one. I think it's natural
Mhm.
for humans. So yeah, I think your question, where is the soul, I've ended up with the question of what is the soul.
Yeah. Well, it's important. It's tied together. Pwede sa paa na lang. So we walk towards the divine. Wow. Yeah. Sa paa.
Tapos pag
Next
nadapa,
question. Oh.
nagkasala ka. Yeah, nadapa.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. Next question. This is from one of
Oh
my
my god.
former students. Yeah,
Who
this
asked
is
it?
former student of mine, Alfred Lakbayo, big guy. Anyway, his question is, dun po ba
Uh,
sa Laissez Faire, yung invisible hand po ba ay left or right? Actually,
what do you mean? Like, what do you mean? Left or right-handed,
I
or
think
what?
he
Is the visible hand left or right-handed? Questions.
he asked this in jest, that I told him that I
Uh,
could take this seriously, and I will take this seriously. So invisible
I.
hand, the free market need not be left or right. There are heterodox Marxists who would
What do you?
argue of free market
First of all,
socialism.
first
Yeah.
of all, what do you mean by left or right?
Yeah, left or right of the political spectrum. So it's either
Right.
conservative or radical. So yes, the
Okay.
laissez-faire, the idea
Hmm.
of a free market, as of now, is located within the left and the right. It's just the current dominant discourse ignores free market socialists. Yeah, they ignore them, sadly. Not for
Hmm.
long. I'm alive, so yeah.
In all honesty, I've never. Well, I have tried to read Adam Smith and his Wealth of Nations, but even the part on the visible hand, it just feels like a metaphor for that one thing, and whether it's left or right is an interpretation of that metaphor. But
Yeah.
what do you think is the closest? Since
Mm,
you've studied him more closely than I have.
mm.
What is the closest interpretation of left, of the invisible hand? And for
Okay.
those of you for those at home,
Mm.
please
Okay.
tell for those at home who do not know who Adam Smith is. What is the invisible hand?
Okay, Adam Smith was a well. I will not call him an economist because even Adam Smith would not call himself an economist. Adam Smith
Mhm.
was a moral philosopher who tried to analyze morality from the perspective of economics or economic affairs. So the invisible hand is more of a moral assertion. It's a normative theory, really. It's to allow individual human endeavors, human relationships to determine who gets wealthy or not.
Mm.
Some people would say it's competition. Some people would say it's competition, but free market
Mhm.
socialists would say otherwise. That the invisible hand actually refers to social relations. It can be competitive. It can be cooperative. It can be both. It can be either. It can move through time. So yes, but it is a moral assumption. So don't call Adam Smith as an economist. He's a moral philosopher. That's one thing.
Hmm.
Anyway, okay, that's
Oh,
that.
yeah.
So
I'm more familiar with his work on the moral sentiments.
yeah,
Whew.
yeah.
Well, I have nothing else to say about that. I think you did it wonderfully. So it's a metaphor for that invisible force in the market, and it's
Invisible.
subject to interpretation. Yeah, it's funny. All the way from soul to the invisible hand. Are they related? Who knows? But it's okay. So, uh, thanks for that question, Alfred. Yeah,
Yeah,
Albert, right? Yeah, okay.
Alfred.
Uh, Next question. I think from our this one is from our page. From George. Hey George. Like a mutual friend of ours, your
Pan,
former student,
our colleague
current
now.
our colleague now in the political science department. She says, "Could you do a brief 101 on U.S. elections and politics, and explain the electoral college, gerrymandering, and right-wing populism?" Wait, okay, that's a lot in one question. That's not fair.
It's so
Okay,
dami.
it's so marami. My God,
So marami.
George,
So
ba't
marami.
mo pinahirapan yung ano? Pinapahirapan nyo kami.
Gumagantihan sa akin kasi siya lagi ko tinatanong sa klase dati.
But she's a brilliant scholar in her own
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
actually.
yeah.
Uh, I think for now, perhaps will you settle for like what's our hot take on U.S. elections right now in general? Because this would take a whole election in itself.
Yeah.
Uh, Wait, you want to start or should I start?
I can start. I can start regarding
Mm,
the U.S. electoral system. Okay, in a nutshell, this would require a separate episode, but in a nutshell, the U.S. electoral system is fundamentally founded on a distrust towards the ordinary voter. Hence, that would explain the electoral college and why Ungotham still exists. So
what is the
yeah,
electoral college?
yeah, as
What is it?
voters don't elect their leaders directly, unlike in the Philippines. So it goes to the electoral college. The electoral college votes for the rest.
Mm.
Anyway,
So
it would
basically,
yeah,
there are two sets of just for the basics. There are two sets of votes. One is the popular vote, wherein all
yeah,
votes are equal.
yeah,
There are others in which there's instead of everyone gets to vote, there are certain delegates, and some delegates
yeah,
vote is worth a certain amount more than others, depending on the state they represent. So
yeah,
some states are heavier than other, or worth more than others because of the population
yeah,
density. So this is in a way originally designed to equalize the vote of smaller states and with bigger states. The problem is like some results are contrary or they contradict the popular vote. Like twice now, at least in recent history, Donald Trump had the popular vote, while
Donald Trump had the electoral
Hillary
college
Clinton.
vote.
Oh, sorry. Donald Trump had the electoral college vote, but they lost the popular vote, and Hillary Clinton had the popular vote. And the same thing happened with Gore versus Bush. Gore had the popular vote, but Bush had the electoral college vote. And uh, what do you have to say about that system? So it's the distrust of the
It's
popular vote.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's also
What
based on the
else?
recognition that the United States is a large country, But then again, these assumptions were made centuries ago, so it's basically outdated.
Mhm.
That is one thing.
That's true. Then gerrymandering, just for basic definition, is to reshape and redefine the state territories depending on, you know,
Districts. Yeah.
districts, and sometimes they would people gerrymander so that would in such a way that the state, like more people in this certain part of the state or that district, would be like red or conservative Republican, and blue for progressive. So, and sometimes it's been manipulated that way. That's why
Yeah.
some electoral colleges are disproportionate, you know,
Yeah.
and some people would say it's unfair that way. So they've rigged that system. It's
Yeah.
meant to equalize, but it was eventually done. Whew.
So
Okay.
yeah.
And last thing is it's related. This is related. Right wing populism. Now this is, of course, Trump's main source of legitimacy, which is let's see, conservatives in Middle America, Christians, and the Bible Belt. You know,
Mhm.
Texas and all,
Texas, Tennessee.
Virginia, Tennessee. Yeah, and it's all related in a way because they felt disenfranchised all of a sudden, sometimes by by the electoral college. They've, for the first time in their lives, they voted for Trump because they see Trump as someone who represents them for the first time compared to the usual Republican candidate. He's not the usual Republican candidate. And so that's a one-on-one on the U.S. elections. For those of you who need to know, although I'm sure there are more specialized videos on this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There are. Ugh.
Get got any hot takes on, like, say, what's gonna happen in the election, which is close, literally next
Uh,
2 weeks?
I actually don't care about these elections.
Oh,
Actually,
why
don't.
not?
I just care about it for entertainment purposes. I really don't care about
Okay,
it
why not?
because it's not our elections.
Mhm.
We have problems closer to our home right now.
Mm,
But whatever happens with the U.S. elections, it will of course reverberate to the global stage
uh-huh.
since it's a superpower.
It's funny though. People are, well, right now. This, if I can do a quick take. Right now, it's between Donald Trump, which is the most, I say the least, the most polarizing president the U.S. United States has had in recent memory, and he's going against Joe Biden, who is the Democrats' hope to beat Trump. Problem is, he was never as popular on his own. He's actually picked on necessity, and he is one of the oldest candidates to have ever run, and they claim he is too he's having cognitive decline, so he's too old to participate properly or even to lead effectively, assuming he wins. And so, oddly enough, and myself, I thought so too myself. People would say that, oh, it's an easy win for Trump, and because all he has to do is let Joe speak, give himself his own rope to hang on,
Mm.
because his cognitive decline. The problem is Trump made it all about himself. He couldn't help but, feel victimized, saying, "Oh, people are against me." Even right now, and this is one of the bigger issues, mail-in voting. He claims that it is a result of disenfranchisement, voter disenfranchisement, and there's fraud. Sometimes ballots can get lost in the mail. And right now, I think over the span of weeks, instead of going to vote on one day, people are voting on the span of weeks. So a lot can happen. And I, well, of course, Trump is against, well, he's skeptical of mail in voting. And I have to somewhat agree with that. Like, it has not, of course, it's been done in the past with soldiers, but a lot can happen. Uh, and of course, the media
Mm.
is clearly progressively biased. So we can't really know how. And it's funny. If ever Joe Biden were to win, what I think the real person behind it is
Mm.
the faction of the Democratic Party pushing Kamala Harris, who got to where she is now by being a kabit. Did you know earlier in her career, the vice president, uh, she was like having an affair with the mayor
What
of
the?
California.
Eh?
Yeah. So Kapag nandito siya sa Pilipinas, tawagin natin siyang kamalakabit. Kamalakabit closer, baby.
Ang ina.
Come along,
Okay.
come along.
That's new info for me.
So, in other words, a lot of it will depend on, but some people would say, okay, granted, it's mail in voting. Honestly, not even American observers know it's a close tie. And most people say, oh, Trump would win. He's a better debater. But I think what really damaged him a lot is he himself got COVID. And though he recovered, it's not still not a good look. So there's that. But on the other hand, you have the factions, some people supporting Biden and are against Trump. And you, in a way, if Biden were to win, you are somewhat rewarding the behavior of progressive people. Some people just simply shouting. Some people are perfectly reasonable, progressives who just want Trump out. But also people who are rioting, seceding from the United States. So, you're rewarding them. So what measures does that take? That's why it's more polarized. So just to prevent
Mm.
Black Lives Matter, Antifa from winning through Joe Biden, they're voting for Trump, even though they hate Trump.
Oh shit.
Anything else to respond to that? Or not really?
No, 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 no. I seriously have very little. The thing is, I have analyzed U.S. elections way, way, way before. When I say way
Mm-hmm.
before, that means Andrew Jackson, Andrew Jackson time.
Whoa, okay. Right.
So basically history, but the recent ones, I have very little take on that.
Mm-hmm.
But, in relation to choosing the least offensive candidate, I think the last question that we have for today would be related to that one.
Mm-hmm.
So one of our friends, Ren, si Rogue Scholar,
Hi, Ren.
asked
Yeah.
us asked us to give a projection of presidential and VP candidates in the next elections for the Philippines and discuss who could win.
Mm,
So yeah,
mm-hmm.
least offensive. There's the least offensive.
Uh-huh. Oh, okay, okay. Well, thank you, Ren, for that question. Hope you're doing well,
Yeah.
uh, Rogue Scholar. Ah, well, okay. Mm,
Who you know what the thing is, we should ask who will lose. I think the Filipino people would lose whoever wins next time. Shit. I mean who
the thing is,
yeah.
honestly, okay, the election is 2022. Am I correct?
Yep.
20,
2022.
yeah. We just had an election last year, 2019. And with all due respect to our friend and colleague, Ren, at this point, it would be somewhat futile to make a projection right now.
Yeah.
Like, even though people are fielding Lenny Robredo or maybe Bongo, or Sara Duterte, who are both under the Duterte's faction, um, or possibly Manny Pacquiao. Of course, that's possible. The thing is, a lot of things can happen in the span of 2 years. We might not even have an election. That's another thing. But the thing is, okay, one thing I'll say about this, and I'll give the mic to you,
Mm,
is this: if you want something different, if you're fed up with the kind of governance that we have with Duterte, then whoever goes against him will have to be a relative outsider. Not too much of an outsider, but you know, with enough political experience to know what they're doing, he or she, but also not within the center of power. Because if you're in the center of power, even in opposition, you are the under the surveillance of the regime, and they can keep you in check because there's barely the Liberal Party right now is the main opposition, and they can barely do anything. They can speak out, but well, they don't have a lot of power right now. And in a
mm,
way, it's the same as a kind of entity as Duterte, only on the other
mm,
side. So because Duterte was a outsider himself, relative outsider. So if you want a progressive or alternative, it has to be someone from there.
mm,
Otherwise, anyone like even Lena Bredo, if she makes her intention known to run again, then
mm.
the same thing might happen to her. The same with Binay, who made his intention known as vice president, and so they launched a lot of legal attacks against him on his corruption in Makati and his family. So yeah, the same might happen with Lenny and anyone, or the same thing might happen with Boshilai and in back in China. You know,
Oh, wait,
that
wait,
that
wait, wait, wait. That is a close case. He was corrupt. Yeah.
yeah. So he's preventing a corruption, but he was a
Yeah.
rival power, and to control, rivals, corrupt or not, that's what that's what they did. That's what the regime did. So it's the same thing. Otherwise, and this is a strong possibility, people like the person, there's a strong chance that Senate and congressmen supporters of the regime might continue to maintain power, whoever that may be. And they have all the tools for it. The only thing that might prevent that from happening, besides a alternative outsider, is a revolution, a revolt.
We.
But we're not endorsing that, but that is a possibility. So that's what I have to say. Borj,
Yeah,
take us
but
home.
you're right. You're right. It is a bit too early, but the battlefield is beginning to form. We now have regime candidates in line. Then we have opposition. Even if it's still embryonic, they still have Leonard Bread as a flag bearer. But the thing is, in line with what is happening right now, I would speak to the disappointed from all camps.
Hmm.
So this is addressed to all the disappointed citizens from both camps. May you be, I don't care what your political ideology is, but as long as you're disappointed, at this point we need to ask, should we even vote? Should
Ooh,
we even
there.
vote? That's one thing.
Hmm.
Should this regime and all of its politicians be legitimized for 2022? Now, that may be too radical, but if you want something a bit more moderate, then I think we can start a blacklisting campaign. Voters' education had
Ooh.
been focused on giving you profiles of candidates. Why not provide or expose their undoings and shortcomings, a blacklist, especially with those who are attached to pending cases?
Hmm.
So, yeah.
It it. I think something similar. I think something similar happened in the certain Facebook group. It's called Anti-EPA.
Mm.
I think it's not really a blacklist, but it just shows
Yeah.
politicians who are being EPA, which
Yeah.
is like people who are trying to gain attention to
Yeah.
themselves,
Yeah.
like having their face plastered perhaps
Yeah.
before campaign period.
Yeah.
Yeah. So something like that,
Yeah.
pointing out specific instances, not necessarily people, something like that.
No,
Anti-EPA.
yes. Something more systematic, something more comprehensive than that. It's actually pointing out people with
Mm.
pending cases. So that's one thing. So I
Ooh.
think voters' education should shift right now for 2022. So that's my take.
Mm.
It's not again. I don't. Whenever we talk about elections, the only people that I care about would be the citizens, not the candidates. I don't fucking care
Mm.
about the candidates. Whoever wins, they would probably do a bad job anyway. And if they do a good job,
Mm.
they're usually deviant cases. So yes, it's time for citizens to find different means to handle elections. One would be blacklisting, comprehensive blacklist of candidates who should not win, instead of trying to give
Mm.
profiles of candidates who should win. Another, and this blacklisting should be non-partisan. That would be easy for the Philippines. We don't have any
Mm.
strong parties anyway. Another would be, well,
We
entertain
have
the
a
idea of,
strong
yeah,
civil society. Yeah.
yeah, that's one thing. So another would be entertain the possibility of not voting, depriving this regime of its legitimacy. So what else? What
Mm.
else? Yeah, the final thing. We must again have a shift of attention away from institutional reform to ethical and moral reform.
Mm.
It's just an agency problem at this point, not an institutional problem. So yeah, I think voters' education should steer towards those directions.
Mm.
Desperate times call for desperate measures.
You heard it here, folks. You heard it here first. He's well, not first. I mean,
Blacklist.
you've been yeah, blacklisting. The start of the blacklist movement.
Yeah.
And populist intellectual. He doesn't care about politicians. He cares about the people.
I'm not a
Are you
populist.
sure you're not? Are you sure you're not beginning your own campaign, Mr.
No,
Borja?
I'm not. I care about citizens, as I've said, the citizens, ordinary
Mhm.
citizens. So
It
BLM,
sounds like
blacklist matters. Blacklist matters.
it sounds like something a politician would say. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh,
Anyway,
no.
no. Well, let's
Anyway,
see.
yeah,
Let's see if anyone were to take up that
blacklist.
thing, that suggestion,
Yep.
or we can start here in our podcast. I don't know. We're just two scholars talking. All
We're
right.
gadflies.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
Bzzz.
Okay. And I think the last question, which also came from Ask FM, um, asking us to recommend a song.
Song.
So asking for music, a music recommendation. So I think this moves to our recommendation part, just to
Yeah.
close today's episode, which has been
Yep.
very heavy.
Because
Woo!
of the soul. Where's the
Let,
soul located? In the feet.
my God. Yeah. You want to start with your song?
Okay.
I hope you don't.
My song recommendation would be "Hammer to Fall" by Queen. I think this would be applicable for the times.
Sample.
Sample. Uh,
Why?
what? What
Why that
regarding
song?
Hammer to Fall is? I think Queen did not have any socially conscious songs in their repertoire except for this one, as far as my knowledge is
Why does it
concerned.
have to be Queen? You have a personal relationship with Queen
No, because I like Queen.
and Freddie Mercury.
I like Freddie Mercury and Queen.
Tell me what is so special about this song? Because most people know Bohemian Rhapsody or
Yeah,
I Want to Break Free. You know what? Why this song in particular?
it's more of a
What's it about?
Hammer to Fall is basically a summary of social conditions pressing people down under oppression and fear. So yeah, and
How does
it's
it go?
nice and it's catchy. Uh, Here we stand, here we fall. History
Oh.
won't care at all. Yeah, well, I think we should put a link on the on our post.
Yeah, if you want to listen to that,
What about you?
So, hmm, it's a bit of a long explanation. Well, if we're going back, you're promoting a. I'm not familiar with that song, but you're promoting a foreign and mainstream band like Queen, and I love Queen. But that's interesting. So I'll give that a listen. I've never heard of that in their repertoire. Um, but for me, I'm going to recommend a Filipino original work, and this comes from the Decada 70 musical. And honestly, I watched it last February, and the book for me is important. So it's about Philippines under martial law during the 70s, Decada 70, the 70s, and they made the book. It's based on a book by Luwalhati Bautista.
Mm.
It's about this family, the Bartolome family, living in those times, middle class, and each of their sons have their own experience. One became a activist and the rebel. Another became a writer. Another one became a regular regular student. Mm, and another one was a child at that time. And well, it's an important work of political history, and they made a musical about it. And the musical, ooh, well, it was an assault on the senses, particularly Act One. And I don't recommend everyone to watch it, but there's this one song wherein you know there's and the musical is best at its quiet moments. And this one song that I remember was different from the other songs. The other songs were like neo rock punk because of the spirit of revolution. This one is entitled Kapatid, and it happens in one of the in the climax of the story. And I won't give it away for those of you who haven't read or watched the musical. But during this climax, in spite of the noisy punk rock theme of the entire thing, this was a quiet ballad. Goes like, uh, I can't sing it right now, but it's a quiet song sung by the youngest Bartolome brother, and it says, aasa pa ba, may bahagi ka ba ng mundo, kahit isang sulok, kahit kapiraso, kahit punti. So it's a
Mm.
song where they don't know what else to do. They're hit by a tragedy, and they're just saying, "Is there a place for us in this world, even if it's like not touched by politics, not touched by tragedy? Kahit
Mm.
isang sulok, kahit isang piraso, even just a small part of the world." And when I listened to it again, I think originally they were selling CDs for a for the soundtrack. I wasn't able to get one, but they have part of the soundtrack on their website, and it's one of the featured songs, and it's beautiful. I listened to it again for this podcast, and I cried for the first time in a long time. So this is to support local artists and local musicals. So if you're into that, uh, please give it a listen. If you're a foreigner, it's a good sample of up and coming Filipino music. So yeah. Uh, I can send you a link if you want to listen to it, Anthony. It's Are you
Yep.
familiar with the book, by the way, by
Yeah,
Decades
familiar with it.
70?
Yeah, yeah, I
Mhm.
am. I am.
Yeah. Honestly, the book itself is a bit overrated. Again, it's important, but it's overrated. But we can talk about that next time. But I think it's the least political song in the entire repertoire, but it's also the most beautiful. It's a contrast. It's not about politics. It's about the feeling of being overwhelmed by the world and just begging for reprieve. Whew.
Yeah, okay.
It's still there. I think there's something with my. Anyway, that was a heavy episode. Uh, Covered a lot of ground,
Yep.
but I guess that is it for our questions. And again, since we enjoyed this so much, despite it being, you know, exerting on our brain, we appreciate your questions. Yeah, what do you think? Do you think we can handle more like this?
Yes, yes, we will have another Q&A soon. Probably once a month would be nice, or once every 4 episodes.
Oof. We'll call it. We'll call it that time of the month where we ask questions. All
But yeah,
right.
keep your questions
Anyway,
rolling. Keep your questions rolling. We can try to answer some of your questions during our regular
yeah,
episodes.
I mean, I'm sure. Well, we learned something about each other, and we learned something new ourselves in preparation to answer these questions.
Yep.
So yeah, okay. So that's it for our first Q&A session. Hopefully not our last.
Yep.
We hope to see you next time. And until then,
Magandang gabi, mga kapiyay.
if you enjoy the jazzy tunes of this podcast, you can find similar works with John Victor Ordonez of the band John's Dirty Old Sneakers at Spotify and SoundCloud. The logo and design were done by Shin Miyamoto and Anthony Borja.